This week, we get a combination of some confusion as well as some answers, clarity, and some seriousness. So it's going to be kind of a black and white sort of week. Welcome back to the Astrology Report. My name is Cam White. This time we are talking about November 27th through December 3rd of 2023. Comment below if you have ever pulled up a birth chart and got the wrong zodiac sign. When I first got into astrology, I thought I was a Cancer for the longest time, and then I actually pulled up my birth chart and I was a Leo. And that's actually what really started my whole astrology path. So anyway, also comment below if you think I need to get a haircut. My hair is getting ridiculously long and it's getting hard to work with. So anyway, we have not too much going on this week. Of course, we do have some highlights as usual. But the way I really wanted to go about this week is, we start the week off with some confusion. And then, we get to the middle of the week where there seems to be a lot more reality and a lot more clarity. So let's just go ahead and start talking about it. So we're starting Monday off on the 27th with Mercury making a square to Neptune. So I'm going to combine the whole full moon in Gemini with this Mercury square Neptune. Now, the full moon is actually on Sunday, the day that you're watching this. And Mercury doesn't actually square Neptune till Monday, but I can kind of fold both of these together in the same kind of day. If Mercury is about communication and ideas and logic and rationale, it's in detriment in Sagittarius. So again, it's kind of pie in the sky. It's kind of, communication is a little bit confusing. I just got into a situation recently where I was like, I made some commitments on one day over Christmas. And then I was also like, yeah, I'm going to go see my family. And then it wasn't until like 2 days later, I was like, oh shit, I didn't even realize I planned those two things together. So I had to redo my schedule. Anyway, Mercury is not doing all that well. And that's fine. Again, what's Mercury in Sagittarius is good for is thinking about bigger ideas, opening up your mind, not thinking so much in logic and rationale, but thinking more about like, okay, what is the bigger picture? What is possible? Leaning more on your faith. But as Mercury squares Neptune, there's a lot of confusion. Have you ever, thought of a goal or, wanted to do something and you get really excited about how big it is, but then you get overwhelmed with like, oh, it's not possible, or how can I even do that? That's not real. That's how I look at Mercury squaring Neptune. There's this like ideal that we're trying to achieve. There's this ideal that our mind is really, fixated on. However, as it squares Neptune, that orb of confusion, that, sense of overwhelming, like, how am I going to get there? What is it going to take? Can I do all of it? That's really what's coming up on Monday. And I think the other part of it too is it's one of those things where if you've ever had to make a big jump before, or like, for example, a trust fall, if you've ever done a trust fall with a group, like a legit trust fall, not just kind of like, oh, haha, like, let me just do it for fun, but like legit let people catch you. There's kind of a moment where you just have to like relinquish the outcome and again, just trust. I look at Mercury squaring Neptune as kind of like, before you maybe make a big jump, I can't think of a movie that does this, but you don't want to look down, right? If you're on a very high, point, or if you're on like a ladder and you got to do something, if you look down, you're going to get scared. You're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to get confused. You're going to panic. And that's almost how I look at Mercury square Neptune is like, you don't want to look down. You don't want to cloud your mind with all of the possibilities of things going wrong. However, with Mercury square Neptune on the surface, there is a level of things just not being clear. So if you're expecting clarity on Monday, you're not going to get it. If you're expecting, answers to be specific or communication to be, black and white, you're not going to get it. Expect Monday to feel a little bit confusing and to have some uncertainty to it, but that's going to be okay. I think one of the better ways to use Monday is to, again, not get overwhelmed in all of the confusion and all of the possibilities, but rather than, getting all confused with all the possibilities, just kind of remain faithful, remain open-minded to what it is, and know that like, hey, you may not see the answer, you may not see the light at the end of the tunnel, but in this exercise, you don't have to. And so then we get to Tuesday, and all Monday and Tuesday, the moon is still going to be in Gemini. So we're still getting a little bit off of that full moon. We're still a little bit chatty Cathy. Our emotions are really connected to communication and ideas. So there's, again, a feeling of overwhelmness or being overwhelmed. The moon is going to make a trine to Venus, though, while Venus is still in Libra. Now, I'm going to give that as a caveat because on Wednesday, Venus will conjoin the South Node. So she's really, really close to the South Node. And we'll be talking about that once we talk about Wednesday. But the moon just making a trine to Venus is at least connecting with people, right? If Venus is pleasure and connection and fun, indulgent, she's in Libra, she's doing really, really well. The moon in Gemini just trining Venus and Libra is, again, sharing, communicating, making a connection with someone. And this is like a feminine connection, right? Like when you talk about the moon and Venus, so we're talking about the yin, we're talking about the more interpersonal part of ourselves and being able to relate and being able to share. And it's one of those things where, you know, when you're going through something and you don't have someone to talk about it with, but then you end up, talking to someone about it and they make the situation just like easier. They're like, oh, I've been through that. Or, oh, like they just give you a different perspective that brings a lot more balance and brings a lot more like, oh, maybe the situation I'm in isn't all that bad or isn't all that extreme. Because when you're just, by yourself in your head, it's just easy to stir and stir and stir. But when you get that outside perspective, it just really helps alleviate any of the pressure or the inflammation. So I think the moon shining Venus is just really good for making connections, talking to people, sharing stories, being close with people, right? But then the moon will go opposite Mercury. And as the moon trines Venus, again, it's like connecting with someone, but then the moon going opposite Mercury is maybe some issues actually communicating something. If you've ever been, most people have, the reason I use the analogies or the examples I do is I try to make them as relatable as possible. And I feel like, of course, a lot of you guys watch this because I do that. But the moon opposite Mercury is like you're trying to communicate what your problem is, but you just can't put words to it. If the moon is our emotions and Mercury is the way that we're communicating and what we're thinking, they're at odds with one another. So there might even be, some resistance, like I don't want to share that part, or that part, the thing that I want to communicate is scary to communicate. What are they going to think of me? What am I, what's going to be the reaction or the response? And another way I look at the moon in Gemini opposite Mercury and Sag is like oversharing. I feel like a lot of young people kind of have this weird thing about like, oh, I overshared too much. It's too much. And I don't know. I don't really believe in oversharing because I think so much of society and people right now are so withdrawn, and like it's taboo to share how you really feel or what you're going through. And I don't think that creates healthy relationships. I think that creates very surface level relationships. I don't really believe in oversharing. Like, express what you need to express that you're comfortable with, but this kind of fear of oversharing with people, I just don't think is all the way like justified. It's just your nervousness about being vulnerable. And where else does that show up in your life? Why can't you be vulnerable with the people that you're around? What are you afraid of? And so the moon just going opposite Mercury is a little bit of oversharing. And when I say oversharing, I mean like nervousness of like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Like you're in a situation where you're connecting with someone, but then you kind of overdo it. And it's kind of like, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Or, oh, let me just be passive about it. And so I would try not to get too worked up about it. You're going to say what you're going to say it with your chest, right? And if you overshare, you overshare. That's something that you can take with you and learn from for the next time. And after the moon, actually, now that I'm reading this, the moon makes a square to Neptune, actually before it goes opposite Mercury, but it's pretty much like the same thing. And with the moon squaring Neptune, again, I'll just come back to what I was saying before of like having struggling being able to communicate what you're going through or what you want to share. It's like when someone's like, oh, what's wrong? You're like, well, it's like this. And, when you actually have to, like, you can feel things, but then when you actually have to like verbalize them, they're like, it's just very difficult to do. And so I look at Tuesday as an excellent day to connect with people. There is going to be some difficulty in actually being able to express yourself and maybe a little bit of overwhelm with it, but I think that's fine. Just go with the flow. Tuesday's pretty chill for the most part. We get to Wednesday, and Wednesday's when we get a little bit more action. The moon is going to ingress into Cancer very, very early in the morning, like midnight. It will immediately make a trine to Saturn, and then it's going to be sextiling Jupiter the whole time, like for the rest of the day, pretty much. So as the moon goes into Cancer, now we're a little bit more focused on, again, nurturing, protection, necessity. Do it like I just got done talking about this on the monthly overview live stream I do over on my Patreon. We were talking about the full moon in Cancer once we get to Capricorn season at the very end of December. And the way I look at it is of like Capricorn reminds me of like doing very rigorous hard work in the mud or in the snow, and you're kind of just like doing your hours. But there's a certain point where you need to relax. Like if you've ever been like very strenuous on your body and exerting a lot of force, like physical labor, you need like a massage sometimes. Like, and for me, I've always like, like I am so into getting my feet massaged. It is crazy. I used to hate it. I used to like be like, don't touch my feet. But then I got like a good one. I was like, holy shit, I actually love that so much. And that's how I look at like this moon, like the moon going into Cancer is like, there's a level of like what you literally need to take care of. Like you need good sleep. You need to be hydrated. You need to get the electrolytes in you. You need to, have good food. You need to be able to relax and feel safe somewhere. And I think as the moon is in Cancer and we're more connected to that, like on a bodily body level, feeling like we need to be more protected, feeling like we need to be more nurtured and like hydrated. And when I say hydrated, I mean both literally and metaphorically. But the moon will make a trine to Saturn. Again, Saturn in Pisces. What we have to do and be responsible for is changing every single day. Saturn's direct now. We know exactly what we have to do and what our responsibilities are. And so I just think the moon in Cancer is like, how can you incorporate some sort of a, I don't like using the word self-care because like self-care nowadays is like drink alcohol and eat sugar. It's self-care, self-love. It's just like, it's just a gaslighting term in my opinion. But making space for you to be able to take care of yourself in order to get the work done that needs to get done. And it's like if you're pouring from an empty cup, if you've ever heard that analogy before, if you've got a pitcher full of water and everyone wants some of that water that you've got to do. So whether that looks like, taking care of your family, taking care of friends, doing your responsibilities, you can't pour the water in those glasses from an empty pitcher. So that's what I'm kind of looking at here. And then the moon, after it trines Saturn, is going to make a sextile to Jupiter, where, again, the whole rest of the day is kind of like, again, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. If you are wrecking yourself on a day-to-day level, if you are not hydrating yourself, both, again, literally and metaphorically, you're going to find more burnout. You are going to it's going to be harder to accomplish the things that you want to. And I just think as the moon's in Cancer, sextiling Jupiter, there's more of that connection of like, oh, I can take some time out to take care of myself. And that taking care of myself, sure, I might have to put the work down or stop doing this, but this is going to give me the results I want on the long term if I just be patient with it. Again, like the moon in Cancer sextiling Jupiter and Taurus is like sometimes, with plants, like they may not be growing or sprouting, especially now in November, but you still have to continuously water them. And at some point they will grow. But on Wednesday, we have another highlight, and that's going to be Venus conjoining the South Node. Now, I've been thinking about this for a while, and it's so weird to me, like, because I've thought about Venus conjoining the South Node as very bittersweet. Like the South Node takes away. The South Node is like, this is done. You're moving on from this. You need to get rid of this to move into a different direction. But with Venus being in Libra, there's been this like, harmony and this connection, and it's been good. But the Venus conjoining the South Node is so like, again, like a bittersweet ending. I think the analogy I used in the monthly rising sign horoscopes I do on my Patreon, maybe it was the month ahead, is like when you got to quit a job. Like, you got to quit a job. And let's say you've worked there for a long time. You really, really like your coworkers. But then, of course, like all of the cons outweigh the pros. And you're like, I got to quit. And then in those last 2 weeks, like you kind of really enjoy it because you know that it's going to end. And that's how I look at Venus conjoining the South Node in Libra. Some other things to talk about is sometimes like the South Node brings things up from the past. Recently with my client work, I've had a lot more like when I'm doing, clients' charts and stuff, like the South Node representing something from the past coming up. Like I had a client who the South Node's in their whole sign 10th house, and a job that they stopped doing, or a part of their, job that they stopped doing many years ago has come back in a very relevant way. And I thought that was really interesting. So Venus, I mean, if this is Venus, this could be about relationships. This could be about, even a sort of a hobby, a sort of person, something to do with, women. It is Venus kind of coming back. But Venus conjoining the South Node in Libra is the overall vibe is, hey, this is really nice, but this is ending. This has to change at some point. And again, that doesn't mean you have to completely crumple up the paper and throw it away. But you just have to turn the next page, if that makes sense. And so the only way I can really describe Venus conjoining the South Node is really bittersweet, knowing that this will not last forever, knowing that you have to move away from this, but in the meantime, enjoying what it is at the moment, being present in the moment with that feeling. And again, just look at what part of your chart Libra rules over. Maybe it rules your 7th house of relationships, and there's some sort of massive chapter changing in your relationship. Maybe it rules your 11th house, and it has to be some sort of change with friends. Maybe it rules your 8th house. So just look at that. So then we get to Thursday. And on Thursday, the moon, as it's in Cancer, is just going to be sextiling Uranus and trining Neptune. Again, I look at the moon in Cancer sextiling Uranus and Taurus is like, so many people are just, what I've learned with Uranus and Taurus is so many people are experimenting with like the Taurus stuff, like food, money, goods, like even like things like property. Like I've seen just such a, like more and more people are kind of having an inclination towards trying new things in this area. And I think the moon in Cancer, sextiling Uranus and Taurus is very like, oh, let me try a cold plunge, or let me try spring water rather than drinking my tap water with my crappy Brita filter or whatever. That's how I kind of look at it. But then the moon makes a trine to Neptune, and the moon trine Neptune, again, there's a good part and a bad part to it. The good parts about the moon trining Neptune is, again, like romanticizing or idealizing. And it's just kind of like, for example, it's like if you've ever tried something new and it works really well and you're like, this is the best thing ever, I'm never going to stop doing this because it was so great. And you kind of romanticize it and idealize it. And I think that's fine. I think it's good to be excited about that kind of stuff. I just think one of the more bad parts too is, again, it's a trine. So this is these two planets working together. It's one of those things where, again, like you can be excited about all that, but like not necessarily pumping the brakes, but just having a level of like, hey, like it's good, it's great, it's working for you. Let's make sure that excitement can be sustainable, that you can keep feeling that way, rather than trying it once, try it for a week, try it for a month, try it for a couple months, if that makes sense. So Thursday is kind of like, again, maybe just, it's very boring, not much going on besides the moon making a sextile to Uranus, trying something new related to Cancer, Taurus, wherever that rules in your chart, as well as the moon trining Neptune, idealizing it, romanticizing it, kind of feeling excited about it. And so then we get to Friday, and the moon will make a square to Venus. It will then ingress into Leo. It will trine Mars and then square Jupiter. So Friday is where we see a lot more action going on. I think as the moon's in Cancer squaring Venus and Libra is kind of like the moon, because the moon's in the superior position where, that term sharing is caring. We all know that. But there's sometimes where you're like, oh, like I need to hold on to this, like, because it's all that I have. And I feel like the moon in Cancer squaring Venus and Libra is like struggling, like relinquishing like the resources that you have in order to share them. That's not to say that you shouldn't. I feel like there might be a situation in which you have to, and maybe not that you have to, but the opportunity to share your resources and to give to other people is there. But there might be this kind of like clutching onto your pearls, or, kind of clutching onto what you have and not feeling super ready. But, it's kind of like when you're a kid, you're like, I don't want to share. And then the teacher's like, but come on. And then you're like, okay, here, take the thing. And then you feel better about it. So the moon, squaring Venus too is also like how we're feeling in our emotions are not like in a harmonious situation with the people around us and pleasure. For example, it's kind of like, I love like EDM music. Like if you guys know Lil Texas, don't look him up, by the way. You're not going to like Lil Texas music. Given my demographic, you're not going to like Lil Texas. But there's probably like 7 of you that know who he is. I love Lil Texas. I'm not listening to that shit first thing in the morning. Maybe at the gym after some pre-workout. Maybe at night if I'm on, again, like a sick one. But there's certain times where like music and pleasure can go really well with the mood, and there's other times where it doesn't go that well. And that's how I look at the moon squaring Venus, is like, oh, I could enjoy the music at one point at some part, but not at this moment. So there's like something like emotionally, like I don't need this, and this is kind of grinding my gears almost in a minute. And we're talking about, again, like pleasure, safety, comfort, if that makes sense. But then the moon goes into Leo, and I think this is where things get really exciting. Moon going into Leo, our emotions are much more charged up with, like, again, like our willpower, vitality, our courageousness, being bold and being like, like saying what's up to people. and it's going to trine Mars. And I think there's something about this moon in Cancer transit where we kind of get like, again, the nourishment that we need for then the moon to go into Leo and trine Mars and Sag, where it's like, yo, we're ready to go. Like if you ever got like if you've ever struggled with sleeping, but then you really get a good night's rest and you wake up charged up, amped up, and you're ready to go. That's how I look at the moon going into Leo and trining Mars. But then the moon just squares Jupiter, where it's kind of like having like too much of a caffeine high, where you're like, you need to kind of press the brakes for a second. Like, sure, you might be excited and you might want to push, but you also have to understand like things take time. So the moon in Leo squaring Jupiter in Taurus might be like, or the way I look at it is like if you order something off Amazon, you're like, I really want to buy this right now. But even if you have Prime, like it's still not getting to you for a week. It's not going to come up to your door that day or the next day. Like you have to have some patience, even though you really want something now, even though you really want to show off something now. So be patient on Friday. But the big highlight that we have on Friday is Mercury's ingressing into Capricorn. Now, I love Mercury in Capricorn. It's one of my favorite Mercury transits because Mercury's, again, communication, ideas, logic, rationale, what we're thinking about, how we, again, verbalize things with people. And it's in Capricorn. It's cut, it's dry, it's to the fucking point. We know exactly what we're saying. It's very black and white instructions. There is no confusion. There is no, I think of Mercury in Virgo, which Mercury is exalted in domicile, and so it works really well, but it's too specific. Like, Mercury in Virgo is like, there's too many words. There's too many big fancy words. It's too specific. Just give me Mercury in Capricorn. Just give it to me straight. The thing is, though, is that Mercury is still in shadow at this point. So I think while Mercury is in Sagittarius and we're trying to like jumble up our ideas and like, okay, what's the plan? Where do I want to go? And what am I saying here? Mercury goes into Capricorn where that becomes much easier. It's like, okay, this is the plan. Let me sit down and write it on my notes. Let me sit down and write a list out. But it's still in shadow. We're going to come back over this spot. In fact, this is the degree that the Mercury Cazimi is at, because we get the Mercury Cazimi once it's retrograde on the solstice, which I find really interesting. But as Mercury goes into Capricorn, again, a lot more clarity, a lot more just like, it's very black and white. It's very cut and dry. Like, you know exactly how to plan, how to do it, but just know that these plans may change. It's kind of like if you've ever written a business plan before, like you can write your rough draft. Like, for example, that's probably even a better example is like Mercury and Sag is like, I need to write an essay or something like that. And then it's struggling with your ideas and kind of just word vomiting. But then Mercury in Capricorn is like, let's get this rough draft together. And then that Mercury retrograde in Capricorn is going to be kind of like, okay, like let's do some editing here. Mercury will retrograde back into Mars where you're like, I had the whole fucking wrong idea from the get-go. Let me redo this idea. And then it'll station direct where there's a lot more clarity on the idea. And then Mercury goes back into Capricorn where now we're writing like that final draft, if that makes sense. That's pretty much the whole Mercury retrograde, which I will have a whole video about. So if you're not subscribed already, make sure you subscribe. Again, rising sign horoscopes for 2024 are coming out soon. Same thing with the Mercury retrograde video. And of course, I just did the 2024 year ahead overview. Make sure you check that out, even though I do have a very silly voice. I promise on the rising sign horoscopes, it will not be that silly. So then we get to Saturday, and Mercury is going to make a sextile to Saturn. And again, this is just Saturn and Mercury working together. And Mercury is in Saturn's house. So Saturn is like doing things for Mercury. So Saturn and Pisces, again, watch all the videos I've already done about Saturn and Pisces. But Saturn, again, discipline, maturity, taking our time with things, being patient, being in control. It is, however, limitations. It is, however, walls and boundaries and authorities. And those things can get in our way at some point. However, there's like the way to get out of like a negative Saturn is to just do more Saturn things. And I think as Mercury is in Saturn's sign, we're kind of connecting a little bit more of like, all right, now that Saturn's direct, whatever part of our chart that Saturn is in, we have a lot. We understand what our responsibilities are. We understand what our duty is. We understand what our obligations are. And now we're moving forward with it. We're a lot more comfortable with it. And Mercury is now connecting the dots and allowing our mind to be like, it's allowing our minds to be connected with those responsibilities where, Mercury might have been in other parts of the sky, focusing on other things. Mercury coming into Capricorn, making a sextile to Saturn is like, cool, I could plan this, I could plan that. I know exactly what needs to be done here. So I really do like Saturday for the Mercury Saturn sextile, but that's the only thing that we've got going on this weekend. And then we get to Sunday, and Sunday is the moon making a square to Uranus as it's in Leo. It will then sextile Venus. it will ingress into Virgo, then go opposite Saturn at the very, very like almost Monday morning. A lot of moon stuff going on. The moon in Leo squaring Uranus and Taurus again is like, if you are, again, our emotions are really connected to like pride and being seen and witnessed, and something might go wrong. The analogy I've continuously used is like, putting yourself out there on stage. Like, again, like maybe you want to start a YouTube channel and you make your first YouTube video, and then like the first comment is like someone calling you retarded. Like, that's going to happen. Something, or like or for example, like you put your first YouTube video out there and your stupid voice ends up being echoed and delayed and you didn't know it and it looks dumb. It's going to be easy to like put your tail between your legs when something that was unexpected destabilizes a situation that you want to be stable. And again, I think the only remedy with this kind of stuff is like, hey, rolling it off, finding some humor in it, and moving on to the next thing, taking that and learning it as it goes. But just on Sunday, just know like there's kind of some like unexpected like shakeup that might affect your pride and that might want you to put your tail between your legs. And so like, okay, it might maybe like hurt a little bit on the heart, but just roll it off, laugh at yourself. It's okay to have humility and move on. The moon will then make a sextile to Venus in Libra, where again, I think that's much more of like the humility, rolling it off, having fun with it, right? Like on my 2024 horoscope, I was so upset that the voice echoed delayed because it was like so much of the video. And I talked to Parker about it and I was like, can you fix this? And she's like, yeah, these are your options though. And it was like all of like the TikTok like sounding voices. And we just went with the one that's not as cringy. It's not like the AI robotic voice or the cartoon sounding voice. But it's funny. And a lot of people, like I just posted it this morning. I'm recording this on Thanksgiving. It was funny. A lot of people are like, laughing at it or they think it's weird. And so it's just like, okay, like I'm not really all that worried about it, but it is a little fun. So anyway, the moon will then ingress into Virgo, where now we're thinking about planning, connecting things, all that kind of good stuff. But it's going to go opposite Saturn at the very end of the evening, where there might feel like this, like if Saturn in Pisces is like on the inside, you know what to do. On the inside, you know where you need to be responsible of. But the moon in Virgo is kind of being like, well, what does that mean externally? Like, okay, it's for example, it's like, it always reminds me of the Karate Kid, where he's like the wax on, wax off. And he's like, whoa, like, what is that for? And how am I supposed to do it? And, how is this going to help me fight or whatever? Like, it's going to be hard to kind of connect the dots and there is this going to be like this resistance to it. Like the moon in Virgo is like, well, I need to do this and I need to do that. And Saturn in Pisces is like, you're fine where you are. Like you have everything that you need. So don't stress about it too much. When the moon separates from Saturn, eventually on Monday morning next week, it will make a trine to Mercury. So there's a lot more clarity, but it's like that feeling of, I know my demographic deals with this, and I think most people do, like a good trip to like Staples, where it's like you go to Staples and you're just like almost overwhelmed because you're like, I need this leather planner, I need this specific notebook, I need these specific pens. Like there's like some sort of a weird feeling of like feeling super organized when you go to Staples. Like that feeling just overwhelms you. They do it really well. But with the moon opposite Saturn, it's kind of like you feel like you're at Staples and you're like, okay, I need to get organized, but I don't even know what I need. And so let me just buy everything. Don't do that. Just be like, hey, rather than just impulse buying, why don't you go home and really take a list of like, what are the things that you need? And do you need all the things that you think that you need? Or are you actually okay with the things that you have right now? So there is that going to be kind of that frustration and that impulse on Saturday. So just try to like calm the nerves a little bit. But also on Sunday, we get Venus squaring Pluto. Now, I don't think typically, like, again, I always kind of like roll my eyes and I always like, sigh when I have to talk about like Pluto transits. But what I find interesting about Venus and Libra squaring Pluto is like our desires being corrupted, like, or breaking the rules in order to get what we want. That might look like, I think of it as like petty theft. Like, I really want this. No one's looking, so I'm just going to take it. The analogy I used on the monthly overview that I just did on my Patreon is like stealing a cookie from the cookie jar. Like, I really want it and no one's looking and it's at the top of the fridge, so let me do it. And I feel like there is a, when I say opportunity, this doesn't mean an opportunity to take on. This is much more of like, hey, this is going to be in your face, but like being able to get something that you want, something that is desirable, something that is pleasurable. However, you know, you might like it might be through a corrupted way. Venus in Libra might even be like, hey, I really want to do this, but corrupted forces might stop you from doing that, if that makes sense. Like the planet of literally like corruption and power and fear is not in is at odds with the planet of like fun, connection, and indulgences. So you'd have to find exactly how that's going to line up in your life. But another way I look at it is it's very like I keep forgetting what TV show this is, but there's a TV show where they like I think it's called like Bait Car or something like that, or like Bait and Switch, where like cops they like leave a car out, they like roll the windows down, they leave the keys in the front seat, and like a criminal is just like, sick, let me take it. And they take off, and then 5 seconds later, the cops pull them over. Like, that's how I feel like Venus and Libra squaring Pluto is. It's like, just because it's right there doesn't mean you need to take the opportunity. And the reason I have that delineation over like, oh, corrupted forces are getting in the way of what you want is Venus is in the superior position here. Like if it was Pluto squaring Venus, like what in like Aries, that would be very like in my opinion, like corruption stopping you from what you want, or again another influence of that. But this is so much of, hey, I want this thing, I want to do this thing, but it needs to be through some sort of level of integrity. It needs to be some sort of level of again, you know, not doing things in a bad way, or I guess that's really the easiest way to put it, but I'd be really curious about what you guys' experience over the Venus square Pluto thing, because that's just like one of those things where I'm like, that can show up in a lot of different ways for people's life. So if you rewatch this on next Sunday, let me know in the comments below, but also next week on Monday, let me know in the comments below what's going on there. But that's this week. We get to next week, and we have Venus going into Scorpio. I have been ignoring Venus in Scorpio, to be honest with you. I'm like, I don't even want to talk about it, but I think you'll be fine. I think you'll be good. Mercury's going to make a trine to Jupiter. I fucking love this Mercury trine Jupiter. I think it's going to be really excellent. And then we get Venus opposite Jupiter too, where that's kind of like the truth shall be revealed on what you actually enjoy and what you don't enjoy. So with that being said, let me know what your guys' thoughts and opinions are in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you can't do anything to support the channel, just like it. It actually does really support me. And with that being said, I'll be seeing you guys next week.